So, to nobody's surprise, I played yet another RPG. This time in the grimdark universe of 40k, to peddle baguettes and get a knife-yard waifu. Because if the girly man has one, so can I! So when it comes to 40k, I will completely admit I'm a bit of a tourist. My first contact with the franchise was Dawn of War, like many people, all the way back in 2006, and when I lived in Montreal, one of my friends was very into that universe. When Games Workshop, the very British and greedy owner of the IP, was making start collecting boxes, I played the game quite a bit in 7th and 8th edition with the DAO, because mechas. I dropped it a couple years ago because Games Workshop is insanely greedy. So if you're expecting a deep dive into lore accuracy, that's not gonna be for me. For that, go to Arch Warhammer after my review, he makes awesome lore content. Anyway, in this game, you are playing as a rogue trader of the Fawn Valentius dynasty. Rogue traders are, well, traders obviously, but with a twist. They own their own star systems, they own their own fleets, and by decree of Big E himself, some of the rules of the Imperium of Mankind do not apply to them, such as having Xenos, or non-humans if you prefer, in the retinue, and not getting immediately executed for consorting with aliens. So from that description and the title of the game, you might expect that there is a lot of trading, but actually no. It is pretty much all about dialogues, skill checks, and combats, for in the grimdark future, there is only war. And a shitload of knife ears. So like always when I play RPG, character creation is first, and oh boy, this is not Baldur's Gate 3. You are not taken by the hand in any way, shape or form. The game reuses some content and ideas from the Fantasy Flight RPG of the same name from 2009, I think, before Games Workshop greed and stupidity took back the license. But it is mostly original content, and you have a staggering amount of options from the get-go to build your character and leveling up. And speaking of leveling up, the game actually indulges quite a bit in your power fantasy, because almost every single one of the major maps is going to be the occasion for you to level up once or twice, and there is a lot of these maps, so you get a good feeling of progression as you play the game. These options are going to be improving your base characteristics or your skills, the background of the character also impacting the actions in combat, dialogue, and make some origin skills available to you. For example, a character from an Imperial world can improve a characteristic and give a similar bonus to the other humans in a party, while someone from a Death world can get a skill to increase his proficiency with primitive weapons, like axes and hammers. Like I said, there is an absolutely staggering amount of options for your build, even if some obvious synergies such as the Astra Militarum commander from a Fortress world end up really sticking out. You can easily spend over an hour just customizing your character, who also happens to have dozens of options for faces, tattoos, augments, facial hairs, scars. This put the game of Larian to the deepest of shame. Once you are done building your character and selecting your starting ship, if you have not gone the Day 1 DLC you will only get the one, though you can still name it, luckily enough. You can get into the game proper and you are immediately presented with skill checks, which in this game is using a D100 system. Meaning you are rolling a 100-sided dice, and after modifiers, you must roll equal or lower to your skill in order to succeed. For example, if you have a 100 in Elvish Waifu Lord Xenos, and the test is a -20, you have to roll 80 or lower in order to succeed the breeding test. Which also means if you had 20 in that skill, it would be an automatic fail. Though I'm not entirely sure the game is not bugged somewhere, because multiple times I actually succeeded a test that should have been an automatic fail. Either that, or it's because I put the game in story mode in some section, which makes no sense to me because the automatic fail succeeded, whereas the 20% chance of success failed multiple times, so I'm not sure what was going on in there. The dialogues will very often present you with such skills checks, and provide either new options to get more information, change the encounter result, or unlock the correct ending of some quest. And unlike Baldur's Gate 3, your main character, or the one that initiated the dialogue, does not need to be the one taking all of the checks. Just like in a real pen and paper RPG, the character in your party with the highest value in the skill will be the one taking the test. This allows to have some properly specialized characters that do not really require to have massive offensive capabilities. Which is good because the combat has a fairly obvious meta about it, I would say. In this game, each character gets a number of movement points and action points. It sounds fairly easy and Fallout-y, but here's a catch. you only have one normal attack per turn and it will deplete all of your movement points. So you will very quickly realize the core idea of the combat is the ability to grant extra turns, mostly through abilities of the officer archetype, one of the classes, in order to increase your firepower dramatically, to the point where I would say if you do not have an officer or two in your party, you either cannot win the endgame fight or it will be extremely hard for no reason at all, maybe other than the memes. The other thing you will quickly realize, and you might already have seen the memes about it, is how completely broken the melee weapons are. Both from the base damage they cause, which seems to be scaling faster than the ranged weapons in my runs, but also because they can more easily hit multiple targets. The ranged weapons are still able to do it as well, sometimes over-penetrating targets, or just by mag dumping into a crowd, which sadly the AI will do repeatedly while your characters are in the way. In fact, it is so unfathomably dumb, it regularly moved in a position where it could catch as many of my party members as possible before going full auto on a couple of enemies. My party catching most of the shots. That stupidity will sadly also be repeated with the enemies, which is probably why there are actually very few of them with automatic or AoE weapons. This may also be the reason why some fights are lasting for far too long, with enemies being raised as zombies or enemy reinforcement coming from out of the frame. It does not happen too much during the main quest fights, but during travel encounters this becomes really obnoxious. Speaking of travels, let's talk a little bit about the world, or should I say the space map. You have a number of star systems, all connected by routes that have different levels of danger, similar to Alcat's Pathfinder games. As you chart the new system that you enter, you can spend some points in order to improve the safety of the routes. The dangerous or lethal ones almost always trigger in combat that will last for way too long with wave after wave of trash enemies. And since there is not enough point to make every single route safe, I just brought all them down to the point where an encounter was very unlikely to happen. The reason of these encounters being that when a ship wants to go through FTL, at least for the Imperium of Mankind, it doesn't really use any kind of Star Trek system, no. It goes through Hell, the realm of Chaos God, Khorne, Slanesh, Tzeentch and Nurgle. So when the anti-demon shield goes down, evil will infest your crew. And sadly for you, Bruce Campbell is not on board. And since we are on ships, there are some very questionable decisions on them. First up, you will get only one ship for the entire game, and I do not mean just the selection. Like I said before, if you didn't buy the DLC, you get only one. If you have the DLC, you can choose one out of three. And despite the fact that you own a manufacturing world and you can build a shipyard on it, you will never be able to change your ship or get another model. You will also never be able to build more ships. The only thing you can get is one measly frigate through an optional quest. That is it. And another problem is, even if you get this frigate, the AI for ships in combat is just as stupid as the one on the ground, meaning your extra ship is suicidal and will often get destroyed turn 1. And speaking of space combat, it is slow, so slow. It's easily the worst aspect of this game. There is a leveling and upgrade system to assign party member to make the ships more survivable, or at least your ship, not the extra, but it's really a bad, gutted version of Battlefleet Gothic. That's all it is. As you travel and scan planets, a little bit like you did in Mass Effect 2, but nowhere near as obnoxious, you'll have the opportunity to place extractorums to, well, extract resources from the planet you visited. These will allow you to construct various projects on your colonies to increase your revenue, give you access to special buffs, or simply obtain more equipment. The problem with these colonies' development is that a number of them require you to have built a certain level of relationship with various factions, like the Imperial Navy, but for the life of me, I could not figure how to actually get decent level with some of them, as they all want different items, but some are present in very limited quantities. For example, the Imperial Navy really wants ship parts, but you find these only once in a blue moon. Same thing with the Kasbalika mission, which really wants Xenos product, but you don't encounter these very often, and not before Act 2. So I ended up just ignoring some of the buildings that, despite being really good or giving some really good equipment, I, for the life of me, could not figure out how to actually get them. And speaking of the game until Act 2, it is sadly relatively buggy after that. Besides some NPCs T-posing on the bridge, in Act 3 onwards, the quality takes a massive nosedive. I encountered broken triggers, broken dialogue trees, and worst of all, none of my characters, including the space elf, could figure out the button to a grate blocking an elevator to the last level of Act 3. So I was completely and utterly stuck just because I killed the Dark Eldar optional companion after 50 hours of gameplay. And since I did not have a manual save, I had to restart the entire campaign. I don't know if it has been fixed since, but it is a completely unacceptable lapse in testing. I don't know how the hell this wasn't caught, and that's coming from a guy who used to work for Electronic Arts. On the audio front, it's almost spotless. Though most of the dialogue is not voiced, only some key sequences are, the actors are doing a stellar job and every single one of them matches what you'd expect from the portrait. Your seneschal is a grizzled veteran that sounds like a grizzled officer.
Master? Whatever are you doing in the Warren Chamber? How did you...
The Sister of Battle sounds like the fanatic that she is.
I shall heed not their pleas.
Somebody shoot these...
I shall betray not your tenets, nor stray one step from them. Take not your gaze from me.
The elf calls you a monkeg.
There is no need to mutilate my language, monkey.
Everyone but the Space Wolf sounds correct. I don't know why, but they added this weird filter on top of his line that sounds completely and utterly artificial and just wrong.
Fenris Yolda, mortal. You know the old words.
The music is also perfectly on point with a number of choirs, very appropriate for the Cathedral in Space aesthetic of 40k, or some more industrial inspiration on Mechanicus Worlds, for example. The ambient sounds are also accurate and the weapons sound very meaty, especially when you get to bolters, which are essentially fully automatic rocket-propelled grenade launchers. On the visuals, and again unlike Baldur's Gate 3, though it's much easier to do in this case, it is just dripping with style. Anyone who ever glanced at anything 40k can instantly tell this is a 40k game, and I'm happy to say, a lot of the models are straight copy of the plastic kits. Some of the character models are even coming from lesser known box game like the Rogue Trader from Blackstone Fortress. Irlit also looks a lot like the Ranger from the same game. And yes, I paint all of my models myself. The equipment and gear is also almost always on point, but I do get the feeling that they might have lacked some time or budget on some of the characters. For example, whenever you change the armor on your Seneschal, you will see a change in the model itself. But if you do it on the Sister of Battle, you can see that the model does not really change. It's only the texture or some of the colors, which might be because they wanted her to be more easily identifiable, but her model is wearing a power armor with the backpack that houses the fusion reactor. So there is a weird discrepancy between what she is actually using and what she is represented with. I think the team is also pushing the Unity engine, because yes, it is Unity, to its absolute limits as there are a lot of models on screens, but the quality of the texture is somewhat subpar, and on occasion NPCs are essentially pre-rendered models with at most 20 frames of animation. In case you are not aware, while Unity can be used for PC game, it is not very well optimized and it struggles when there is too many assets loaded in memory or on screen. This might be the reason behind some of the weird choices, but it creates a problem during cinematics as the very low quality textures, like the body of the Space Wolf, are in full display and look like a PS1 quality. And I don't know what the FPS count is on consoles, but the pre-rendered NPCs are a very stark contrast with the rest of the world if you have a rig like mine that can render well over 100 FPS on that game. And if you're actually watching the video and not just listening, maybe you have noticed it, but the entire universe lacks sharpness, as if entire aliasing times 16 was present by default and your settings added more on top of that, making the entire world look fuzzy. Just a little break to remind you that if you want to continue seeing my autism, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a like or dislike, and leave a comment because the algorithm gods apparently like it a lot. Thank you! Now onto the video. Now, onto the writing. For the first two acts, it's absolutely stellar. You can play as an Imperial Puritan, a heretic, or try to adhere to Big E's idea of enlightenment as an iconoclast, which is ironically in direct opposition to Imperial Creed and my personal 40k isekai choice. I'm also very happy to report you can play as an absolute authoritarian caricature of British nobility, executing any commoner or lower nobles left, right and center as you wish, and the game will appropriately accommodate you, giving not only different avenues, but remembering what your choices were, at least until the end of Act 2. In Acts 3 to 5, like I was saying before with the bugs, it's like characters just forgot whatever happened before and become inconsistent. For example, Irlith mentioned she respected my character despite his hatred of her kind, except I made peace with Eldars at every occasion I could and treated her as an equal for the entire game. So why is she telling me that I hate her and her kind exactly? The subtlety and the mystery present in the previous acts are also gone, and villains become either remarkably stupid or completely inconsistent with the lore or logic of their species. This is also repeated in the ending scene, which, as in previous arcade games, is a permutation of slides and text, but this is not a AAA game, so I'm not expecting a big AAA end scene. Though now that I think about it, Bethesda is AAA and they suck ass at that as well. But the specifics are in the segmentum spoilers, so if you don't wanna hear it, go to here. Okay, so as I was saying in the beginning, you are a rogue trader, or rather, you are becoming one during the introduction, inheriting your power from Theodora Valentius, the current head of the dynasty, after she is killed and the other candidate turns into a chaos spawn during a mutiny fomented by the Spy Master, himself a former candidate who got kicked out of the race after a major fuck-up. Pretty pissed about it, he decided to join a chaos cult vying for power in the coroner's expense. And despite the introduction painting him as your nemesis, you will not see him again until the end of the game, for some reason. It is also during your struggle to survive and dashing through corridors that you will meet with Sister Argenta, the white-haired bolter enthusiast. So after the failed mutiny, you are now in command of a crippled frigate, or at least we're told she's crippled, but in terms of capacity, it's absolutely unchanged. Far from any colony, and your first order of business will be to get a navigator, something Games Workshop stole from Frank Herbert to allow you to travel through the warp, aka Hell, without turning into the event horizon too often. Once you have secured Cassia, young navigator, potential love interest, and vocal cord clipping enthusiast, you can finally go FTL, your first stop being a space station technically under the incompetent rule of another trader. So obviously after your hostile takeover, you will be heading to try to fix your closest colony, which, predictably, does not go particularly well and falls under the chaos cult of the Final Dawn. On this planet, you will also encounter your tech priest, Pascal. If you don't know what a tech priest is, imagine a bunch of zealots replacing as many body parts as possible with implants, believing machines have a soul, and have to perform a ceremony if you don't want your washer-dryer to eat more than one sock at a time. During the final battle, you will also encounter your first Chaos Space Marine of the Worldbearer Legion, the only legion you actually encounter, and where the game starts taking some pretty big liberties with the lore. To put it bluntly, the chance of 6 baseline human, even including a Sister of Battle, are pretty much zero, and you will fight numerous Chaos Space Marine and demons through the game, which your party should have no chance of beating. But it would make for a pretty boring game, so I will tolerate it for now. Back on the ship, you get the first dramatic choice between saving the population or destroying the planet, now lost to the cult anyway, to prevent the creation of a demon world. As the name implies, a planet literally covered in demons and chaos monstrosity that will eventually spread to other systems, though that never actually materialized in my first run. Considering some Dark Eldar stole the sun anyway and the planet is doomed either way, I burned the planet down on my second run. But now that you have a full complement to make the ship run, you will be able to explore the entire expanse in search of your colonies, including a Forge World, a planet covered in factories. I was about to say as far as the eye can see, but pollution is so dense that the eye does not see very far anyway. An Agri World, a planet dedicated to being a breadbasket, a penal colony where slave labor can be thoroughly exploited, and where obviously conviction is usually hereditary. And finally, your capital world, but you will only be going to the palace anyway, so that world is kind of forgettable. On the Forge World, you will once again find that the cult has been very active, and has switched from whatever toaster the world was building en masse to building Demon Engine, which, cool little detail, you can see them being assembled or fabricated in the background. And weirdly enough, once you retake the world, they are still being manufactured, but don't pay attention to that. You will also encounter more Chaos Marines in addition to fully assembled Demon Engines, and needless to say, a party of 6 should have absolutely no way of winning this, but the dialogues and corrupted Mechanicus writing is so on point I'll excuse it. On the Agri World, you will meet the Governor and, more importantly, Irlith the Outcast Space Elf. On the world, it quickly becomes apparent that you also have cult activity. but also some of Earlit's kinsmen from their now destroyed craft world, a giant planet-sized ship who, while not allied with you, will either collaborate or try to exterminate you. Either way, turns out the governor is also part of the court and indulging in all kind of kinks in their Slanesh sex dungeon, including the summoning of demonettes who are probably changing pronouns constantly. Once you're done disposing of this degeneracy and lowering the colony's ESG score, you can go to the penal colony, in which you may or may not rescue the heir of a competitor trader while disposing of yet more cultists who figured out how to resurrect through weird warp magnifying glasses around the arena, which you can obviously break to put a stop to the respawning. Now that all of your colonies are free, you can trigger the last quest of the second act, sending you to the Ascent of Nowhere to inspect a Webway portal, the Eldar equivalent of a Stargate, that does not require going through hell per se, just to be ambushed by the BDSM knife ears who will also use the occasion to raid your capital world. Once you are done dealing with them and their edgelord leader, you can finally start your Ascension ceremony, formally installing you as a rogue trader of the Von Valentius dynasty. Retiring to your quarters will also be the occasion to meet the local Lord Inquisitor who, while being very well written as a clear villain and extremely well voice acted, could not make it more obvious you're going to be killing him at some point.
Because you do not want to know the price of such an error.
The third act is going to be mostly played in the city of the Dark Eldar, after your knife-eared companion betrays your party, hoping her BDSM cousin would help her save what is left of her craft world. And this is where the quality nosedives hard. I cannot judge too much if it is consistent with the lore, but the Dark Eldars are essentially teenager-level edgelords for one, and for two, you will be transported to Komorrah, the city hidden in the Webway. While it is extremely faithful in terms of design, your character stops every 20 meters with a cough, and there is no ship to go back to restore your injuries, and the items which are supposed to be doing that were bugged. Also, despite the very limited area that you're actually going to be playing in, quest triggers were very hard to find. This is by far the most frustrating area of the game, and many bugs made it no favor, especially the one that forced me to restart the game from scratch. So when you get the occasion, remember to take the Dark Eldar with a portrait that you want to make a deal, or you might actually get stuck as well. After you have killed about half the population of this area and escaping it, you may decide what to do with Earlit, whom you probably don't want to airlock since she is a crazy good DPS. Starting Act 4, you learn that the Lord Inquisitor has enlisted the help of the other two major rogue traders to restore order and fight the Xenos incursion, which you will quickly learn is actually something that he caused himself by making a deal with the knife ears. But anyway, both traders are in need of help. One is completely insane and channeling her inner Conrad curse by punishing every single criminal on the station with death, no matter how small the offense. That made me think that she was a Chaos Cultist herself, probably associated with Scorn, but turns out she was just insane, which is why I killed her to have the former smuggling ring back in charge. The other guy is hunting Eldars on a jungle planet. Jungle planet that is in fact a labyrinth, that uses identical screens, where just the exit selected can send you to the same route, or on a different one, without any way to tell. I was swearing like a sailor the entire hour it took me just to find my way. Eventually, you will find the rogue trader and his bodyguard, both completely fresh despite having fought for days and the rest of the team being completely exhausted. Considering how unsubtle they are about wanting more blood and scores, it's insanely obvious that they are corned cultists, and they will sacrifice their own team in order to summon some bloodletter demons. If you have saved the elves, it will effectively be the end of Earlit's companion questline, and you'll get her good ending. As you might expect, this act will be the ending of most companion quests. Your seneschal family is facing accusation of treason, false obviously. Pascal turns out to be the leader of a somewhat heretical branch of the Mechanicus, or at least far too progressive to most. Cassia gets to restore the sanity of her own house. Jay gets revenge on her old associate. I have to say, just like Baldur's Gate 3, it's pretty clear the team already had its favorite from either the integration into the main quest, or how abruptly the questline ends. For example, Argenta, who has been a pretty one-dimensional character so far, just playing the part of an Imperial Court devotee, which, to be fair, she is supposed to be, has her final quest end with a short, boring fight against mostly trash mob guarding an old Imperial vessel. only for Argenta to go in alone and return with her actual power armor. In contrast with Elite, who goes from utter disgust and contempt for humans, including your player character, to showing affection and understanding, at least in a waifu route, kinda like Viconia in Baldur's Gate 2. In this act, it is also revealed, quote-unquote, if you hadn't guessed from the obvious green glow in the portrait, that what you might have thought was the machine spirit of your ship is really a Catan shard, because so far Games Workshop has not been able to place a lot of his newer plastic models in the game. To conclude the Final Dawn questline, you finally team up with some Space Wolves in order to assault the last outpost of the cult, killing both the Chaos Space Marine leader and the traitor spy master you haven't seen since the intro in a really obnoxious level full of warp tribes. So, as you advance to the final act, technically Act 5, turns out the allegedly Puritan Lord Inquisitor, or at least that's what Heinrich, your Inquisition companion, thought, is an extreme radical who intends to use a piece of a Catan, the enslaved Necron gods, and also where Nomos came from, to fight other Xenos. So after going through a few systems of absolutely no importance, you eventually reach a tomb world, where you will go down and down fighting every single Necron on the way, once again including some of the newer plastic kits. You will finally find the Inquisitor. So, the final combat is in two phases. First against the Lord Inquisitor and his retinue, who are way weaker than a number of trash mobs you have fought getting there, and the second phase against the actual Shard, which is the Shard of the Void Dragon, I think, who is not much of a challenge either, despite the multiple clones he creates through the fight. Upon defeat, you get to decide the fate of the Shard and trigger the ending scene, by essentially encapsulating it into an Imperial version of the Tesseract Vault. Like I said before, and in Hellcat's game tradition, the ending scene is really a PowerPoint permutation, which I'm completely fine with. In my case, I went with the Iconoclast route and trying to improve the expense and keeping my companions happy, except the Dark Edgelord, whom I gave to the Inquisition to play with without a second thought. The end scene, while appropriately grimdark in nature, clearly has some lore inconsistencies and also disagrees with itself. In the early slides, it says that I turned my domain into a utopia, a place of enlightenment and cooperation, even somewhat accepting of Xenos, kinda reminiscent of the Interrex in my mind, far more in line with the Emperor's ideal, ironically, than the Imperium, which the Lord of Terra see as a very big sedition risk and destroy my dynasty as a result. Except the next slides completely contradict that statement by saying that not only did my forces kick the ass of the Imperial Navy, some fucking how, but because I had good relationship with Nomos, now having taken over the rest of the Catan Shard, it uses its space magic to literally block travel from the rest of the Imperium. So how the fuck did my domain ever got a scratch? So my headcanon is that the slides are just completely wrong, and I now rule my own little utopia separated from the Imperium with my elvish waifu. So, what to say about the game overall? It's a really nice CRPG, sadly with quality dropping severely about the middle of the campaign, which is also the opinion I had about Hellcat's previous game, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. I would say the faithfulness to the lore of the 41st millennium is good enough, especially if you don't have much knowledge of the universe, but the studio really needs to learn to focus its efforts and not feel obligated to make the campaign last for 50 hours when 25 to 30 would have been more than sufficient. I suspect the problems with the quality of the writing by the midpoint is likely related to the attempt at stretching the story, or including a number of checkboxes and not actually having enough material or time to finish it all. Hellcat should also transition to the Unreal Engine, or develop their own, because it's very clear that Unity cannot handle the amount of assets on screen, causing some pretty big discrepancy in visual quality, especially during the cinematic that go close to the models. So overall, I would say it's worth the price. It's very worth the price, especially if you also happen to be a fan of the 40k universe, or just want to have a fairly complex CRPG to sink your teeth in. So you can go get it. It's present on Steam, it's also present in physical form, I believe, and I'll see you in the next one. Salut, bonsoir!